Looks like we are the only two here. We have about 8 or 9 RSVPs, so we'll see what happens. Can you hear me?
I hope someone shows up. Be kind of lonely if no one shows up.
Well, if no one shows up, we will have the recording that's we can send to them to see, right? So
does the recording show the other people, or
the Zoom does the recording, so
yeah,
pretty much looks the way that what you see right now.
Okay.
But you're right. I mean, at the bottom of it, it says the number of participants. But we can certainly frame
That's
it.
fine. I mean, I would say it was a recorded webinar. That's fine. It's just harder to get us excited when you're not talking to anybody but you. You've heard my stuff.
I imagine that we're not going to be alone the whole time. I don't know that I've heard your stuff about this planning guide, though. I'm always learning something. It's one of my 5 qualities.
Yeah, exactly. I did 2 days of somebody else's training the last 2 days. Well, I only lasted a day and 3/4 or something, but.
What kind of training?
Culture.
And what's your takeaway?
They're not near as good as we are at training, but they're okay. I mean, guy's been doing it a long time. It's basically a consulting firm, and it had a few. There were a few nuggets in there that, of course, you can take away, and a few things. He's going to come to our Manager 360 thing. There might be some chance to work together. Sounds like basically he has Toyota management as a customer, and so he makes all his money off training and coaching Toyota managers.
Well, that's a pretty nice account.
Yeah, exactly.
Concentration problem.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I think, but he's older. I think he's been doing it a long time, and that's kind of settled into a nice little business doing that.
Okay. Let's give it one more minute. Okay. Was the training in Austin?
No, it was in Dallas. But that's where my wife's school is, Dallas Theological Seminary. So she came with me and went to a couple of her classes in person. So
I went to visit my best friend from high school. He was the best man at my wedding. He lives in Dallas. Last month, and he said August was the worst month.
Yeah, August is typically bad, and September was particularly bad this year, but now we've gotten a little break.
Okay, that's interesting that nobody who RSVP'd is showing up. So you live and you learn. So shall we just go ahead and get started?
Yes, I was going to say, I mean, do we know we have I assume I just did it off the calendar.
Yeah, that's what everybody has.
Okay. I mean, I'm just double checking that we aren't on the wrong meeting or something.
Yeah, if they were I checked. If they were on a different meeting, I would have gotten an email that somebody's waiting.
Okay, that's right. Yeah,
sure. And I don't have it.
Okay, I'll turn on the game face.
Welcome to the American CEO webinar, where we strive to give you relevant and practical information to do the #1 job of a CEO, which is to deliver a rather predictable performance. Joel, good morning to you. How are you?
Good morning, Sharif. Good to see you.
Good to be with you. I remember my early career, I would hear things like, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. Obviously, if you have a bigger company as a CEO and you have a board that you report to, you might have some kind of planning system that's in place, that's structured. You put together something called the planning guide, the 5 steps planning guide. Tell us a little bit about the history of that and how you use it personally.
Yeah, so in working literally with hundreds of companies, often doing goal setting and stuff, it was kind of amazing to me how many companies didn't have any planning process in place that was formal, that really considered a lot of the key questions. Yeah, maybe the exec team would get together and write a few things down beginning of the year, but that was in no way passed into the organization in any consistent manner. And if you went and asked an employee what were the even goals for the year or whatever, a lot of times the employees didn't have any idea. So we started putting together this planning guide as a way to give people a starting point, fill in the blanks, some templates for how to think about doing strategic planning on a yearly basis.
And you use that in all 8 of the companies that you worked in?
Yeah, I've used some version of this, and you continue to refine it and tweak it and add things every time you do it, and try to make it a little better every time. But, the going through a planning process was something that I always did in all my companies. We also, every 6 months, I would get the entire executive team offsite, at least for a day or two, to review, to update. I'm a big believer in things like a 12-month rolling budget instead of having a yearly budget where you just, in October, we create the budget for the next year and we don't look at it again until October. I always thought that didn't make a lot of sense, that you ought to update your budget after every quarter. You ought to make sure everybody's aligned. You ought to talk about, future strategic objectives out 2 and 3 years. And so we, as an executive team, would do that on a 6-month basis, and then we would do a more formal process with the board on an annual basis.
Got it. Now, jumping right into your guidebook, and the first step is called retrospective, taking a candid look back. I think that's interesting because most leaders that I've met, they're always excited about the future and not necessarily as excited about where they are in the moment. So talk to me about that.
Yeah, there are a couple of reasons to do that. I mean, obviously, I think it's important for the team to celebrate the victories you did have. 2020 was an interesting year. 2021's been an interesting year. But, all of us probably had some victories, and the team needs to be recognized for that. So we always wanted to start out the meeting with, hey, what are the 2 or 3 or 4 big things that we accomplished this year? What can we be proud of? What can we, slap people on the back and say, great job? How can we recognize people who've been particularly critical to the business success this year? Those are things that you're right. A lot of A-type personalities are always focused on the future, tomorrow. What can we do? Get better. All that is great. But I think stopping and looking back so that you can recognize the performance of people is very important. And also you need to just have an objective reality view of what you did well, and then what you didn't do well in the previous year. Where were our failings? Where were our issues? Where did things not develop the way we thought they were going to develop? But being honest about that and clear with everybody on the team about that's very important.
That makes sense. Step 2 is to establish the company priorities, which that word priorities is a loaded word. It's one thing to go through all the exercises that are listed, but the biggest question I would have is, how do you avoid having blind spots and when you're setting priorities? Yeah,
so priorities really important. As I tell people, having again gone through this exercise with hundreds of companies, what often the CEOs tell me is they're surprised after they go through the process to find that a lot of their employees, while working very hard, were working on things that just weren't important to the business, didn't add value to the business. And that's what happens when you're not very clear on what the priorities are for the organization. And, I find many CEOs that are big on strategic planning, and they have, maybe they produce a 50-page PowerPoint that has all their strategic plan, but then they don't communicate that in any way that it changes behavior to the rank and file employees. Well, if your strategy doesn't change the behavior of the rank and file employees, do you really have a strategy? It's kind of like the famous, when a tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, doesn't make a sound. I feel the same way about strategy. You can do the best strategy work in the world, but if you as the CEO and maybe your exec team are the only ones that know what the strategy is, how's that impacting the day-to-day activity of the business? And so this idea of what are the priorities, critically important, and then I always look at the 6 areas of the business to try to figure out and make sure I'm not neglecting one part of the business. The tendency, if you have a sales background, maybe as a CEO, is to focus on, 6 objectives, but 4 or 5 of them relate to revenue and sales, and you forget about other pieces of the business. So the 6 areas I always look at as I'm setting company priorities for the year, and I basically ask the question, what's the most important thing we're doing in each of these 6 areas? First one, shareholders. Obviously, we exist as an organization to return value to our shareholders. So what's the most important thing we're doing there? Customers. Many organizations kind of tend to forget about the customer. They don't collect data about customer satisfaction consistently. They don't know where their customer is. They just kind of have these vague ideas. So that's the second area. Employees as a group are the third area. What are we doing to continuously improve, attract, cultivate, and retain, exceptional people in our organization? What's the most important thing we need to focus on there? Sales, obviously, marketing, and then product. So those 6 areas. So, I usually draw the 2 triangles up on the board: shareholders, employees, customers, sales, marketing, product. And I ask my team, okay, what's the most important thing we're going to accomplish over the next 12 months in each of those areas, or 24 months, or over the next quarter, whatever period you're setting the priorities for, and try to capture that and write those down. And that's a way to make sure we don't overemphasize one area just because naturally it's very easy to emphasize one area over the other.
That makes a lot of sense. Moving on to the third step, which is team alignment. And I know you you teach a whole 2-day seminar on team and mission. But to me, I recently saw you put something together. It's a 1-page strategy, which seemed to be kind of the product of taking all of this information, putting it on just a placemat, basically front and back. Tell us what you mean by team alignment.
So I have my placemat here. I don't know if you're going to be able to see it. It looks like it's going to not work very well on the camera, but this is something, that if you go through our stuff, we'll produce, and I produce for my company every quarter. And what's included on that placemat? Well, it starts with mission and vision. And a lot of companies create their mission and vision and maybe put it on a business card or something and hand it to everybody. But you want to make sure that you're very clear about your mission and vision. You want to make sure you're very clear when attracting people to your organization, that they're buying into your mission. That's probably, as I've gotten older, the thing that I have increased in importance. I always thought it was important. But the older I get, the more I think it's important that you try to see if every employee that you hire is really buying into your mission, or are they just taking it because there's a job. There's just a huge difference in motivation and engagement when employees identify with your mission and it resonates with them personally. And so we start with that, and then we list the values of the organization. And I actually call these value differentiators as opposed to just values, because a lot of people will put in values. They'll put in integrity and trustworthiness, and sounds like the Boy Scout creed. But those don't differentiate you unless you have some, unique take that no other company has on integrity. Listing integrity doesn't differentiate you, and therefore doesn't allow people to understand how you are different from your values. And that's what you're trying to do with your values, is show how you're different. I mean, an obvious example, Southwest Airlines, their value of having fun is a very different value than a United Airlines that maybe focuses on safety. Both are important, but one says, no, we're going to value fun a little bit higher. One says we're going to value safety. That dramatically changes the employees they hire, personalities they hire, and it changes the way you experience on a flight those employees. And so your values need to provide differentiation and allow people to make decisions based on hiring and what they do in their day-to-day jobs, because you look at the world a little differently than other people do. And then on the next on the same sheet, I list what I call the strategic objectives, which are the goals looking out typically a 2 to 3 year time horizon. Certainly more than 1 year in advance. You want these goals to be things that aren't really attainable in a short period of time. So there's a phrase in goal theory called terminal goals. You don't want these to be terminal goals where people achieve them and then they're like, what happens now? You want these to provide a guidepost, though, and a direction for where we're going as an organization. So I tell people, do all the strategy work you want, but if you can't bring it down to 5 or 6 strategic objectives looking 2 years out, I don't know how you change anybody's behavior in your organization. And so that's one side of the sheet. And then the other side of the sheet is just the quarterly goals for the person's team, whatever team they're on. If they're on the executive team, it'll be the company goals. If they're a member of a sales team, it'll be the sales department's goals or whatever for that particular quarter. And yes, we make those into basically a placemat and put those on every employee's desk so that they have to at least glance at them occasionally, day to day. They're seeing them, they're hearing them, and it's not just something they hear one time at the beginning of the quarter and then everybody goes about and does whatever they were planning to do anyway.
So valuable for you to share this. Step 4 of the guidebook for planning for 2022 is the talent plan. And I know that you advocate for the CEO to be actively involved in certain aspects of recruiting, and I imagine that can be a blind spot for a lot of people who think somebody else should be doing that. Tell us about the talent plan.
Yeah, well, the first thing I think you have to realize is to grow any business consistently, you have to master the ability to attract and make productive, talented people. And that's a really important concept that a lot of CEOs, I think, don't get. They think you can grow the business over the long term by just selling more. And you can't. You can sell more over a quarter and grow the business. You can sell more over maybe a half a year and grow the business. But at some point, every business then must deliver that product. They must account for that product. They must service that product. They must do all these other things that are necessary as part of a business. A business doesn't exist just to generate revenue. It has to fulfill that commitment to the customer and be able to do it consistently. So to do that, inevitably, if you're growing a high growth business, as all of us want to have, that has real value in the marketplace, you have to master the ability to find people and make them productive. And so I think once CEOs kind of get that concept in their head that that's the only way to grow rapidly, then naturally, hey, I need to be involved in that process. Any way I can help in that process is important. And a lot of it is just convincing the rest of your management team that that's the only way we're going to grow, so that they provide the appropriate amount of time and resources to recruiting people, interviewing people, and onboarding people in a productive way. Because a lot of organizations, there's a great quote from Richard Fairbank I love. He says, most organizations spend 2% of their time recruiting, 75% of their time managing their recruiting mistakes. And so that's what happens if you're not purposeful about the recruiting process. And these days, it's taken even more urgency because you just can't find people. I mean, I talked to 100 CEOs, 99 of them are going to complain about not being able to find the people they need to accomplish their goals in the next year. And so that's, I don't know that there's anything more important for a CEO to spend their time on.
Say that last sentence one more time.
Yeah, I don't think that I can't think of anything that's more important. I equate it, I always wanted to be the coach of the U.S. Olympic basketball team when they had Michael Jordan and Larry Bird and Magic Johnson and all the best players in the world. And like literally the 10 best players in the world were all on the U.S. team. Because if you do that as CEO, you don't have to be a very good coach. You don't have to be a very good manager. You just roll the best 5 in the world out there. And then when they get tired, you roll the next 5 best out in the world. It's pretty simple coaching job, right? And so I think that's the way I looked at it always, is if I do a really good job on the talent acquisition side, boy, it makes everything else about the business so much easier.
Very cool. The last of the 5 steps is personal development, which I'm calling, the man in the mirror or the woman in the mirror. because when you grow the person, when you build the person builds the business is how I see that. Tell me what you've seen in your experience.
Yeah, I think it's very easy to get so busy that CEOs, avoid this. I think it was Lincoln who famously said if he had 8 hours to cut wood, he'd spend the first 6 hours, sharpening the saw. And I think, most CEOs almost spend zero time, partly because they don't know where to go to get good information about the job. And obviously that's why you and I have collaborated, is because we think we have some good information that we can share. And we've curated a lot of the best information from all kinds of sources to save CEOs time to not have to go chase all this down themselves. I never claim I invented how to be CEO. I think I curated how to be CEO from a whole bunch of other people who had bits and pieces of it, but hadn't really put together a systematic thought process around doing the job. And so, I think CEOs would certainly benefit from spending, a significant amount of time dedicated to how are they going to be better at their job, where are their weak spots. All of us can improve from a management, leadership, and coaching perspective and utilizing those tools that are available. And so I think that's certainly something that CEOs need to focus on, and why I spend most of my time, trying to get in front of CEOs and explain some of these concepts.
I know it's a passion for you. The last part of the guidebook is a checklist. Is that pretty much self-explanatory, or is there a way that you use that checklist?
Yeah, so I think the checklist just, we're all a lot better. There's a great book about checklists, and how they revolutionize things like surgical procedures and stuff by, the human brains just can't keep a lot of information in our head at the same time. And so while you can learn all this and I do it every day, and I still have my cheat sheet when I'm teaching to make sure I don't miss 0.4 or 0.5 in the exercise, right? And so I think that's what's important here, is organizing, having some more organization to it, so that you are, touching on every area and not forgetting things.
Wonderful. Well, we're going to get this whole guidebook sent out to everybody who would sign up for this seminar. I see Patrick is on the call. I appreciate your accountability, Patrick. We had a lot more SVPs, but you're accountable. We are doing some updates to the guidebook before we send it out. And before I turn it over for a question to Patrick, one final question for you, Joel. I hear things like, thought is the enemy of flow. I hear things like, go with the flow, trust your instincts. So that there are some people out there who are leading organizations who are very intuitive based, and the idea of planning seems like it's an obstacle to actually letting the flow happen. How do you balance those things, or what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think it's very much, I have a tennis background, coming up on 50 years of competitive tennis. And I think most of us, have some experience with some sort of sports or activities like that. And, what you do in something like that is you practice the fundamentals very religiously. You do that in a very structured way. You do that over and over again, so that when it comes time to compete, you can let things flow, and you can be intuitive about how you engage. And so that's exactly what I think you need to be doing about the CEO job, is you need to figure out the fundamentals, make sure you're doing all the fundamentals. And that allows you then to be intuitive and experience the flow, because you're not playing whack-a-mole. The role in which I see most CEOs operate is, just what I would call whack-a-mole, right? Every minute they're being faced with a new problem that wouldn't have existed if they had planned and done the fundamentals correctly up front. But now they're in this continuous whack-a-mole, and they don't know how to get out of the continuous whack-a-mole situation. So they're not really being intuitive and flowing. They're not being creative at all. They're being totally reactive in the way they're doing the job. But that is the least successful way to do the job. One of the things I always say in training is being busy constantly is the laziest way to do any management job. because the only way you can be busy constantly is if you're allowing somebody else to set the agenda, right? And you're just taking the tasks as they come to you. And as CEO, there will be an infinite number of tasks that come to you if you allow it. And so, I look at it very much as, no, there are certain fundamentals, certain planning things, strategic things I have to do. If I put that structure in place, though, then I can spend a lot more of my time thinking about the future, being creative, looking for great ideas, looking for great people. But most CEOs operate in a very reactive mode where they have no time. They don't flow. They never reach a state of flow because they're reacting to the firestorm of the day.
I'm glad we're recording this, Joel. A lot of people need to hear that message for sure. Patrick, welcome. You don't have to have a question, but we have a few minutes left. Is there anything that came to your mind that you want to ask?
No, I don't have any questions because I'm too busy, like whack-a-mole, to have anything thoughtful to add. So no. I couldn't pass up that opportunity. It was too easy. I do like the two triangles, like Joel, like that as a metaphor, just to kind of keep people centered. Like that's totally intuitive. Like it's a perfect example of a checklist thing, right? Like, just drawing those two triangles and because really ultimately at the end of the day, those two triangles are like the big perspective on the whole thing, right? And but simplifying it down to I'm a big believer in visual metaphors, not just words, right? So I will probably put that one to work sooner rather than later, right? That's a cool way of just simplifying the world and going, what's important, right? And we can, and you can build on a lot of stuff from that relatively simple, two triangle framework.
Yeah, I'm amazed. Just during the week, I draw that 3 or 4 times in conversations with various people, CEOs and stuff. And I do think it helps simplify dramatically and gives people, oh, okay, let's step back to the big picture, because it's so easy to get focused down into the weeds without doing it.
Yeah, that's excellent. Yep.
Wonderful, guys. Well, good to be with you both today. And to anybody watching later on, I hope you enjoyed it. Our next webinar is in 2 weeks. You'll get an email about that. If you have any questions, reach out to us. Thanks very much.
All right. Take care, you guys.
Have a good one, Patrick.
See you, man.